All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Hendrickson. I'm a consultant with Org Vitality out here on the West Coast. And I'm really excited to have all of you here today for this webinar on making your employee survey matter. This is a topic that has been of really high interest in the last couple of years. This is something that keeps us all really busy here at Org Vitality. It's what we do. We see a lot of you in attendance here from all kinds of places, some really familiar faces that we're glad to see, and some new people. So we're really excited to bring this to you. Couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Handouts will be coming at the end, so don't worry too much about taking copious notes as we go. Just enjoy the webinar. At the end, we will send you all of the slides, and there will also be a survey at the very end. So after we spend the hour talking about surveys, if you could take the survey and let us know what you think of the webinar, that would be really helpful to us. Also, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. So as questions come to you throughout the webinar, keep track or send them to us through the chat box, and we'll address those all in the last 10 to 15 minutes. So with that, if we go ahead and get started here, a little bit about who we are at Org Vitality. We're all about surveys. So we've conducted surveys for just over 40 of the Fortune 100, 87 of the 500, and 11 best places to work. In just the last year, our surveys have been conducted in 38 languages in over 100 countries. All of that just to say, we know the complexity and detail of surveys, and this is what we do, what we love to do. So we're excited to talk about this with you today. And your presenter today will be Scott Brooks. Scott has a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, over 20 years of consulting experience, really diving into these surveys in detail. He's a partner and vice president at Org Vitality, always has great stories and insight about this, and we always learn something new from these. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over. Scott, we cannot hear you.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
One quick point before we really dive in. There is a book that Jeff Saltzman, the CEO of Org Vitality, and I wrote that's coming out basically as we speak. It should be hitting the shelves at Amazon and local bookstores. And this book covers a lot of the themes in much more detail than we're going to be covering here. And it also goes well beyond surveys into what makes organizations successful. But with that, without a lot of stretching and warming up, let's dive in, and I'm going to give you all a pop quiz. So, question, what does this list below describe? What is involved with instilling a strong commitment to make a change, focusing on realistic goals with measurable results, specific action plans, public goals, coping strategies to deal with problems, social support and buddy systems, making sure you get started, and rewarding success. So think about it for a second. What does this list sound like it's describing? Now, I'll give you a hint. It's not organizational change, although it might sound like it. I'll give you one more hint. All right, there's the visual hint. And yes, you've probably figured it out by now. This is advice from the science of keeping New Year's resolutions. And why is this important? You know, it sounds a lot like survey action planning. It sounds a lot like organizational change. And we'll, in fact, be using this metaphor a little bit as we go through. So if we think about New Year's resolutions in the backs of our minds, and now we turn to employee surveys, what is an employee survey? Well, there's a lot of fact-finding and analysis, but ultimately the goal is to do something different. It's an opportunity to focus an organization on a topic. Think about focusing all 10,000, 100,000 brains and people in your organization to be zeroed in on some key issue. You can do that with a survey. Think about, in this way, a survey is kind of like a New Year's resolution for self-improvement. And in fact, the big purpose is, in fact, change. But It's hard. Just like keeping your New Year's resolutions to lose weight, getting off the couch, doing all the exercise you want, saving for retirement, quitting smoking, getting the exercise you need, eating right, all those kinds of things are difficult. And similarly, there's top challenges with creating survey change. In a study a few years back, along with Jack Wiley, this was conducted for a conference presentation for the Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychology. We surveyed seasoned, trained survey practitioners in Fortune 500 organizations that all had long histories and long dedication to surveys. Still, they had challenges that they listed. Even the most experienced folks still try to work hard to make things happen. And these challenges basically filtered into two broad categories. The setup, is this important? Do you provide resources? Are people held accountable? And then the implementation, how do you focus? How do you drive action? How do you execute? If you think about this list, framed differently, this is what derails. These are the biggest struggles with most surveys. And so the question of this webinar is, how can we help? And so we're going to be focused on these kinds of things as we go. And as we do so, we're going to sort things into three broad buckets here, these survey touch points. First of all is strategy. What's the purpose? What are you trying to accomplish? What are the meaningful questions, the organizational challenges you're trying to hit? Second is insight. How do you collect the data, share results? It's basically the machinery that makes things happen. And then lastly, how does that information or that insight that you gather drive meaningful change? And so we're going to talk about a few different broad buckets here. In strategy, we'll talk about defining the target and covering strategic and unique topics to you. We're going to talk in insight about building the story around business needs and how not all employee opinions are equal. And then for action, we'll talk about creating assignments and establishing a rhythm. So with that, let's dive into the first one. So this is strategy, targets and unique topics. So what is strategy? What is organizational strategy? Well, three quick tips on it. It's not ambition. Making more money, getting more market share, these are not strategies, these are ambitions. And same thing with employee engagement. A higher employee engagement, that's not a strategy, that's an ambition. That's wanting more of a good thing. A strategy properly will direct choices. It will help you say, I want to turn left or right in order to make more money, or in order to gain more market share, or in order to build employee engagement. And it will be unique. The strategy of, let's say, Target needs to be unique from the strategy of Walmart, because if it's the same strategy, then there's no competitive differentiation and they're pursuing the same things, and whoever runs fastest wins. But most organizations are trying to do something different than that. So a strategic survey should be uniquely you. And what does this mean? This means that you should be able to look at your survey and find something unique about it. You should be able to see yourself reflected in your survey. And if you can't do that, then we would assert that you're not really doing anything right. You're not really doing the surveys quite right. So there was one organization where we were talking and we were starting to work with them, and I held up the survey virtually. It was a telephone conference, and I said, can you see yourself reflected in there? And they could see sort of vaguely some questions in the vast minority that were about service. And this was this organization was all about service. There were a couple of questions about that, but not that many. So we worked on figured out how to build in cross-functional collaboration in order to deliver service and some more things like that that really echoed what their big issues were. So another way to think about this, another way to think about how to do this is if a leader could snap his or her fingers and have everybody focusing on improving one thing, what would it be? This is kind of like asking, if you could make one New Year's resolution for your whole organization, what would it be? Now, the ideal is maybe asking the CEO before the survey is designed, but it doesn't need to be. This can be when just before you're reviewing a report with a leader, but always ask before you dive into data, before you start talking surveys, if you could snap your fingers and have everybody improving one thing, what would it be? So one example, this happened to be a high-tech organization that was also into consumer retail. And we asked the question here, what were your biggest things? And they had some slowing growth due to some product market saturation. They needed some new products in order to drive the future. And these were the basic tips coming out of this. And so related, there was the pace or capacity for innovation. There was scalability, reflecting the tension of growth versus profitability. There was deeper relationships with existing customers that they were trying to do. And also, they needed the talent to be able to execute in the future. These basic ideas became the foundation for the survey. Now, as I say these things, one common reaction is a lot of people say, well, that sounds like me. And it does sound like a lot of people, but it was richer and a little bit more specific for them. They had one aging product that was it was based on a legacy technology that was about to become obsolete. But what did this do in terms of survey objectives for this organization? Well, we said we want this survey to support organizational strategy, that scalable growth in the mature product lines, the innovation to create the new product lines that will drive the future. And they had basically a new ventures division that was chartered with a lot of the innovative exploration. But we also wanted to build and maintain employee engagement to fuel these kinds of directions. And all of these challenges helped to define survey content. Organizational sciences have evolved, and we've done enough linkage research to know what employee opinions actually relate to these kinds of things. Now, that was half the story. The other half was that they just generically wanted to build the discipline of listening and responding to employee input. So this side is more about how the information would be used. They wanted to form the executive committee to make better decisions, strategic decisions about their unique concerns, and they want to enable managers to create impactful action plans and also provide the tools for the HR business partners to be more supportive. One of the sub-themes to this was they really wanted to up the game of HR consulting. And so all of these parts of the objectives implied process and rollout decisions. How are we going to do things? So as we dive in then, we are really trying to think about what is the goal of a survey here. Are we trying to drive engagement, which is sort of a knee-jerk reaction of a lot of employee surveys, or are we trying to drive performance? Both of these can be valid questions. You might decide that, hey, you know what, of all the things, we're not focused completely on organizational success. We just want to know employee engagement. That can be fine, but don't confuse the two because they're different kinds of things. They're two different targets. And a lot of business success might be related to employee engagement, but you think about, are we trying to reduce waste? Are we trying to improve service? Are we trying to improve retention or safety or productivity or innovation? And understand that we in HR are often succumb to a gravitational pull just to focus on engagement. That's where we understand things better. That's kind of what we feel we should measure. But understand that a survey is a tool. And an engagement survey is a specialized tool, a more specialized tool than a generic survey. And so one of the things we want to do, let's say we do want to focus more on business success, and employee engagement can play a role in that. And we have, though, a couple of tools to help us out. And first here, we've got a little quote from, you can call him a physicist if you want, but I'm going to call him a survey researcher at heart. And he says, science is what we do to keep from lying to ourselves. And so we'd submit that when employees or executives don't want exactly an engagement survey, they want information to help the business. And so sometimes surveys or engagement surveys take on a life of their own. And we'll do this tool. We'll look at research to figure out what helps us understand what's most important. Now, one way to think about this, if you want to focus on the business, is don't just look at employees and scrutinize them. Ask them what they see. People are good predictors of the business. And in this way, you can extend the vision of leadership into the corners of the organization or into the different parts of the planet where your organization might exist to figure out what's going on and what's sort of the wisdom of the masses that can bubble up. So don't just ask about their experience, ask them what they see. Now, what the research says about things like this is you want to include questions in your survey that if you want to predict X, let's say you want to predict customer satisfaction and loyalty, then include questions that ask about X. So on the one hand, some of the survey questions on this side here are listed in abbreviated form with their relationship to customer satisfaction. So overall, our customers are satisfied. You know, customer problems get corrected quickly. You know, we measure progress in customer service and quality and so forth. This happens to be based in some research from a few years back that was published in the Journal of the HR People and Strategy organization. Terrific organization. We can give you more information about that if you want. But if we look at that, you know, these coefficients are okay. They're pretty decent in terms of social science research. But if we were to look at more traditional employee-centric kinds of predictors here, satisfaction, not considering leaving, feeling valued, those kinds of things, those don't predict nearly as much. So what's the message here? If you want to understand X, make sure X kinds of questions are included in your survey. This applies to customer loyalty as listed here. It applies to innovation. It applies to safety. It applies to efficiencies and risk and global expansion and opening the marketplace and sales and revenue and all kinds of things. Now, here we've got, you know, questions with coefficients and things like that, and this might help start to build a model of performance. But you know, you don't need a complete model of organizational effectiveness to be boxes and arrows and coefficients and things like that. A picture can do a pretty good job. And so what this picture suggests is that, you know, there's engagement maybe in our survey. That's the fuel, and there's no power without it, right? So engaged employees are motivated and passionate and connected and committed to an organization. But you also want to include questions about the engine. You know, how do you create value? How do you actually move from here to there once that's powered by what's in the gas tank? And those kinds of questions might deal with customer focus or innovation climate or quality processes and so forth. And there can be other things you might include in your survey, you know, steering and agility, airbags and safety, or GPS navigation and sort of big picture leadership direction and things like that. But most importantly here, both the gas tank and the engine together tell a compelling story. And if you want a different kind of visual and car doesn't work for you, you can work in something related to your organization. Or if you do want something a little bit more traditional, we have something like this that's actually covered in the book about sound leadership driving employees, processes, offering service, and customers. Won't go through all of these things exactly, but the point here is that if all you do is survey employees and ask about themselves, then you might be sub-optimizing. You might be missing something out. So that kind of wraps up a little bit about strategy, right, where we've talked about defining the target and so forth. What I want to move to is move in our blitz fashion here around the circle to insight, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about building a story around business needs and about how not all employee opinions are equal. So what's the goal? What's the goal of the insight? It's to create information or insight that will drive action. And I'm going to skip over exactly how you might decide mechanics, pulse surveys, regular annual census surveys, something every 2 years, is it a long survey, a short survey? That's kind of a topic that's subordinate to figuring out all these other things about strategy. But I want to instead go to, once you've got some data, what kinds of things do you think about? Now, some key tips. A common vision of insight looks like this. Whether you're talking surveys or big data or other sort of mysterious kinds of research, an outsider's view seems to have, you know, all these kinds of statistical efforts coming into the magical survey blender, and out comes some version of music that tells you exactly what to do. Well, that sounds good, but it's not exactly the way the things happen. And it's mostly a pipe dream. We need to figure a few things out first. If this is your vision, and you are time pressed, and maybe that makes you accidentally a little bit more inwardly focused and looking for a recipe, what happens by accident, and unfortunately, is that a common reality for executive presentations is, well, let's calculate our engagement index scores. let's make some comparisons to history and norms. Let's look at some of the drivers of the engagement index, also maybe with comparisons to history and norms. And let's do some cuts by maybe gender, tenure, age, ethnicity. What is this? This is a recipe that anybody could do. Doesn't matter what your survey is, you can probably figure these things out from it. But it's an example of variable-driven and not strategy-driven analysis. It's tool-focused. It's what you can easily do. And in this list, there is nothing about what keeps executives awake at night. There's nothing about your unique business situation and your challenges. So what do we do? What's a little bit of a better way to start? Well, if we have an action mindset, we might contrast two questions. First question is, anybody who looks at survey results, one of their first questions is, hey, what scores are low? There's an undeniable gravitational pull towards saying, what are low scores, right? Or what's low compared to benchmark, or what's declined, or what's improved? It's a natural thing to ask. But if at the same time we ask, what should I work on? You recognize by putting both these questions on the table at once that they're different, right? What should I work on is about importance. It's about what's useful. It's about what's plausible or practical or connected to what I already care about. And so when you're starting conversations with leaders at any level, you put both these questions on the table. Say, hey, what's low? Okay, good. We understand that. Now, what should we work on? And that begins to highlight how these are different. So how do you identify what you should work on? What are ways to start thinking about it? Well, one of the ways we do it, whether it's at survey design phase or whether it's at chartering the presentation of the big story phase, or whether it's sitting down with an individual executive about to crack open their own report that's already been generated. What we do is we ask them what we call non-data questions, right? And so here's just a sampler. It's like, what keeps you awake at night? What drives performance in your group? What have you been trying to improve over the last year? Where are your improvement energies already existing? What are you going to try to do in the next 3 months? What's on your charter? How do you create the most value for your organization, or where are you most at risk? Now, not all these questions are going to resonate perfectly with everybody, but somewhere in this list, you will find something that starts a conversation. Not a sharing of survey results, not an education about how to read data, but a conversation about what's important to you, and that's where you want to start. So one way to think about this as a sampler in terms of how we might create an executive presentation is, here's one tech company. Now, this tech company happened to be about to come out of a venture capital funding support, and it needed to generate the revenue to run on its own steam, right? And there were a lot of things happening to it. And so we asked, first of all, column A, and we did this even before there was any data, right? Even before the survey was designed. What's your business focus? Well, the customer experience. And part of that, because it's subordinate to driving revenue, because that's what we need. We need to take our talents and our competencies and the capabilities and capacities that we've already developed and build it into actual money. They also had an impending merger almost of equals coming up, so they need to figure out how to integrate things. Now, they had integrated a few smaller organizations in the past, but this was going to be a big deal. And through all this, they needed all employees to have confidence in the organization's future and be able to see what was going on. So all of this was tied to specific survey content. And so you can read across the rows, right? Customer experience was related to a lot of customer focused questions and customer outcomes. You know, how well are we set up to do what we do, and how well do we think we deliver? And we looked at some key perspectives there. Some employees served customers more directly, so we paid a little bit more attention to them. Also with driving revenue, there were a lot of questions about the sales process. And those were not all asked of everybody. Some were asked of most people, but it focused on you know, the employees who were most involved with sales, including the sales force, but not limited to that. They were starting into a specialized, sort of their own unique version of a solution selling process, which involved more cross-functional teamwork. So all of this was very important. Integration, same thing. Some survey content and some key perspectives that we looked at, as well as confidence in the future. And so what this list became it was not just page 2 of the presentation, or page 1 was the title page, right? So this is the first real content. But it reflects the objectives of the survey. It reflects a table of contents of that presentation. It helped to form the basis for our analysis plan of the story we wanted to tell, and it ties to action, right? So what are some snippets of what we found inside this particular presentation and some of these results? Well, some example insights. Number one, we found that the top salespeople, this was related to their new sales strategy, which was their #1 issue in driving revenue. Their top salespeople were more confident in the sales strategies, and they were involving customers more in co-creating solutions, which was part of what they were trying to do, right? So that was good. But wait, these top salespeople, part of the President's Club, were also experiencing some challenges in the infrastructure to get things done. Certain processes about delivery or problem resolution or management. And so they were more concerned about this. And so what does this do? This highlights how the top salespeople became a special indicator of where there were more important corrections to make folks anywhere in sales even more successful. And so a few lessons from this mini case study. Content flowed from the strategy. Not all employee opinions are equal. Sometimes we pay more attention to high potentials versus all employees. Sometimes we might pay attention more to folks who've joined via a merger to understand how well the organization can integrate new companies and project that into the future. For the sales, understanding the sales process in this case, we paid more attention to what the top salespeople were doing and what their top concerns were, so that became more of the priority and action plan, right? And in HR, we're a little used to thinking about all employees should be equally valued. That's true. As human beings, we all count the same. But as people with insights into organizational functioning, we're not all the same because we have different perspectives. Another perspective here is that engagement in this particular survey wasn't there at all. And in this case, it would have been distracting to the CHRO's message or mantra about we want to be connected to the business, we want to be strategic, and we want to be more about confidence in this case rather than just plain engagement, as it were. So that's maybe how we can focus on developing insights that become relevant. How do we move now around the horn here to action? And want to make a couple of points about creating assignments and establishing a rhythm. Now, most survey efforts are complex. Part of our task is to rally people to your cause, and you want to deliver an assignment to create change. The goal is to get people to invest time and money, to invest their effort and their attention into making some sort of meaningful change, right? And to help use the survey data to help them make the changes they're already trying to make. So we think about this assignments in terms of 3 categories of people who will be your change agents, right? You can break this down a little more specifically for you all, but generically we think about these 3 categories, right? So there's executive leadership, right? Who are the people at the top who are charting the organization, most concerned with strategy, and they are the people who most set context, provide resources, tone at the top, and so forth. And then the third on the page is where we tend to devote our most energy. This is line managers. They get maybe lots of reports and try to create actions in their teams and so forth. And then somewhere in the middle, you have centralized staff who may have a specialized focus, like maybe I'm part of a diversity committee, or maybe I am chartered to develop training, service training to the whole organization, or maybe I'm part of a quality council, or whatever it is, people with specialized interests. Now, all of these three groups can happen simultaneously in any survey. We're not saying at all that you need to pick one over the other, but you do need to understand that each group comes from a different mindset. They each have different kinds of energies and interests in surveys in a natural sense. And they each might need different kinds of support, different kinds of tools or reports or consultation to make it happen. And so what you want to do is start to figure out what is our big picture for change management. And you can think about a one-page summary that might look kind of like this, where you list out the who is creating change, executives, line manager, HR, and maybe decentralized groups. What's their main role? What kind of report or information or insight are they going to get? What's their focus or target for action? Maybe some notes. We got a little sample filled out here. I don't want to spend time going through each of all of these places, but the idea is whatever your grid looks like here for something like this, think about who is trying to create change and what you want them to be doing and how you're going to support them with survey information and what's their target, right? So we are, through something like this, we're articulating assignments. Right? The specifics of the columns or the cells aren't really important, but you're doing this, and you can do this before the survey even goes live. Like, what are people supposed to do? Sometimes you don't really know, and you might need to feel your way over a couple of survey iterations, and that's fine. But have this kind of thing in mind for the different kinds of groups that might make change. Let me spend a little bit of time highlighting a couple of these groups. We've talked a lot about executives. Now, a few notes on their role. Number one, executives have, as part of their assignment, certain tasks that cannot be delegated. Communicating context, participating in prioritization, resources, creating commitment or accountability, and recognizing and monitoring progress, and so forth. If these things aren't done by executives, survey can never truly maximize success, right? Executives need to be on board and engaged in at least these things minimally. Now, what can some of these things look like? Well, here's a couple of quick snippets or stories in bullet form. One is there's a CEO, and this happens to be a story that our CEO at Org Vitality likes to tell. This was Ross Perot, and he would get a list of actions that managers were supposed to start on any given day, and he'd call them up. So here's Ross Perot, the CEO of a large organization, who would call up a line manager and say, Jane, I see you're supposed to start doing something today. Is there something I can do to help? Now, if Ross Perot happens to call you up, or the CEO of your organization calls you up one day and says, hey, Bob, Sally, Jane, Gertruda, I think you need some help. What can I do to help you out? What you might be is a little befuddled. You might be a little taken aback. You might not sound as intelligent as you want to, but let's say you manage your way through that conversation and things work out okay. After you hang up the phone, what's going to happen is you're going to tell everybody around you, oh my God, Ross Perot just called me on the phone. And it creates buzz, and so that the next time anybody gets called, they'll be a little bit more prepared. That kind of story moves through an organization at lightning speed. Another quick, easy thing to say is that after you deliver an executive presentation, it's easy for a CEO to say, hey, everybody around the table, my executive committee, 90 days from now, I expect each of you to formally present areas that have become your priorities in your own specific functions and actions to date. It's real easy to say, creates buzz and accountability and forces things to happen within functions, because then those individuals will turn around and ask other people to do other things to make sure that there's something to say in 90 days. That's a fair and simple thing to do. If you want to get a little bit more involved, there's one organization had what they called a Blitz Day. This was actually adapted from unionization efforts. Unions will have Blitz Days where they're trying to contact employees and organizations and talk about the advantages of a union and so forth. This happened to be in an organization in healthcare where unions were strong, and there were actually a really strong partnership between labor and management. And so they crafted this technique not to be about unionization and labor relations, but they got organized and they went around. It was organizational leaders, actually some union leaders, but also HR folks and managers. They fanned out across this whole organization, which covered an entire state. In this case, it was Colorado, maybe not Texas, but certainly bigger than Rhode Island. And they fanned out to different cities in that state, to all the facilities, and they met every employee that came to work that day. And they shook their hand, they said, thanks. They handed them a card and a piece of candy, and the card read, think of one idea to improve patient care and customer satisfaction, and go, discuss that with your work group. What did that do? That created a lot of buzz. It created license for people to talk about service with their managers in their teams. And it happened, and it worked, and lots of things started happening all across the organization. They were so successful with this approach that a couple of years later, they did this on a national basis for patient safety. Also a very important topic, right? Not just patient service, but patient safety, where it creates buzz. And each of these things creates ripple effects. It creates stories. It creates people turning around and having conversations with other people to try to drive action. And that's really important. So if that's kind of some snippets on executives, how about HR? One of the best ways to summarize how we see the HR role in this is as a personal trainer. You cannot exercise for somebody else. In HR or organizational effectiveness or talent management or wherever some of the people owning a survey process might be, no matter how many sit-ups you do, your managers will not get abs of steel. That just doesn't happen. But what you can be is a guide, a trusted advisor, a motivator, a goal setter, a facilitator. You can help executives and managers live up to their own good intentions. Most people want to listen and respond to the views of their employees. Most people want to exercise a little bit more than they do. And so you can call people up and say, hey, Bob, I haven't seen you in the gym in a while. How's your survey follow-up going? And so this is what your support can be. But let's break down this word support. It's kind of a big word, means a lot of things. Let's categorize it here into a couple of different things. Let's say that there's 4 categories. You want to motivate people. You want to inspire and drive them to change. You want to prioritize them. Nobody has as much time as they want. So it's like, what can you focus on? I can't exercise and eat well. I got to pick one. Can you help me? You want to guide them to exactly how they might, once they've picked a priority, move down that path, and you want to track how well then, how far they have moved down that path. What these are is they're supporting an organization's discipline of listening and responding to employees, right? And that's one of the bigger themes, one of the people themes of what a survey is all about. And it's promoting evidence-based management techniques and skills, because you're providing some data, you're providing some evidence, and you're trying to help people change because of that. And so, again, I'm going to show you, just forewarning, a big grid with lots of stuff in it, but don't take all the words necessarily as the message. It's the idea of making a little index here of who's getting assignments down the side, right? We've talked about executives, line managers, maybe centralized groups, or how is HR going to provide support. And you could think about these, how you deliver support topics. How do you motivate, prioritize, guide, and track in each of these lines? And so we can fill these in, and the exact words, the exact things you do are not as important as being conscious and thinking about each cell and saying, where will executives fall down? Where is the blockage in the process? So maybe they're motivated and prioritized, but you need to keep them moving and help tell them what to do with little guidance with an HR coach. Or line managers, maybe they don't think this is important, so some sort of accountability system is most important. Or for centralized groups, maybe you want to help them track with the survey whether a program like a quality initiative is really having an impact. And maybe with HR, you want to give them a train the trainer to help them understand, how to provide prioritization. So again, the point here is not filling in everything in all 4 cells for all these people, but thinking about each row and what each row is supposed to be accomplishing and where the blockages might be. Now, through this support, we want to step back and say, all right, how do we participate? What is happening here? And what we're doing with this discipline of listening and respond to employees is, I want to come back to this New Year's resolution metaphor, that there's practical value in having a rhythmic organization-wide survey process, right? What's happening? Just some quick facts. New Year's resolutions are not all successful. We all know that. We've all made resolutions that we have not maintained. And people say that about half of U.S. adults make resolutions, and maybe about half of those are successful 6 months later. However, if you make a resolution to do some important change in your life, you're 10 times more likely to succeed than comparable resolutions made at other times of the year. What is this saying? This is saying that an annual, regular sort of social support around New Year's makes a difference. It's a thing. A New Year's resolution is a thing. A resolution on September 17th is not necessarily a thing that you can talk about with other people. And surveys in an annual, rhythmic, regular kind of period make a comparable social support for organizational improvement. So their rhythms matter. And if we're talking about rhythms, let's talk a little bit about jazz. So Duke Ellington, jazz great, and you think about jazz as sort of breaking rhythms and doing crazy things. But here he says, without a deadline, baby, I wouldn't do nothing. And so we want to consider deadlines and schedules. They're important even for improv jazz greats like Duke Ellington. And so let's step back from just New Year's kinds of things and the timelines that might emerge from that, and think about a big picture, like an annual cycle of what a rhythm might be. This is an example of maybe executive touch points in a classic sort of employee survey scene. Okay, so let's say January, you have an executive presentation, they deliver the results. Maybe you come back and you say, hi, remember me? I'm back into the executive room, and we're back on the executive radar with some high potential analyses talking about how some of the folks that you want to advance their careers and sort of nurture them the most, how they are feeling specifically about being engaged in some of their careers and stuff like that. And then maybe you're back in May and you say, look, here's where we are a few months later based on what kinds of actions and organizations have been happening throughout the organization. Here's where maybe you can goose the process a little bit and so forth and so on. Maybe you're back in July, maybe there's been a pulse about how things have been going, and you're back in September to help them with strategic planning. And then in November, maybe there's some research that has connected what employee opinions say to subsequent customer loyalty or quitting or safety records or whatever it is that's on executive minds. And then you're back again in January saying, hey, here's the new fresh result. What is this? This is keeping things percolating at an executive level about information that's listening and responding to people. And if you've done the survey right, it also covers unique strategic topics that executives care about. You can weave into this other organizational effectiveness, talent management, other kinds of things you might be involved in. You can weave into this, like when are leadership offsites that are being held oftentimes, or cyclical rhythms to the business, busy seasons and holiday periods if you're retail or whatever it might be. But think about big picture rhythms. Think about cycles. That matters. And so what we've done here is gone through pretty quickly and touched upon strategy, insight, and action, and a couple of key points in each. And, the theme here has been that focus on strategy, focus on what executives care about, what folks can do and what means things to folks. And then think about insight and how do you build a story to support all of that bridges between that strategy, those important topics, and then the action. And with the action, think about assignments, who's going to do it, and rhythms, and then how that comes back and translates into strategy. So that's kind of the big message here. There's a lot to do, but don't worry about doing it all at once. Don't worry about doing it all in first pass of a survey. Sometimes these things take some evolution. And you can think about here as another industrial psychologist, another great survey researcher, Franklin Roosevelt, said, do something. If it works, do more of it. If it doesn't, do something else, right? And so get started. Plow into one or two of these kinds of topics. I want to close on one point, is that there are a lot of technological advances. There are a lot of choices you can make. There's a lot of things that are possible. And you can think about, do we do pulse surveys? How do we manage open-ended items? How do we survey maybe just group by group or everybody at once? Or do we have a long survey? Do we have a short survey? Whatever. It's easy to drift in some of these new choices and options, and they're fun, and they're interesting, and they're sexy. But all of these are in the insight bucket, and they're absolutely subordinate to strategy, making sure you're pursuing the important objectives, and action, making sure you're motivating and guiding change. So whatever you do, whatever your choices become with insight, they are subordinate. So we can talk about chicken and we can talk about egg, but just like I'm saying here, you want to focus on strategy that first, and then action second, and then the bridge between those two is insight. I can also say that, in fact, which come first, the chicken or the egg? There is an answer to that. According to a biologist, you would say that the egg comes first, because that's where the mutation happens to transition between a Neanderthal chicken and a chicken. And then that egg hatches and the chicken grows out. So the egg comes first. And so here the egg is strategy with a thought about action, and then the chicken itself is the insight. So I am concluding here, and I think we've got some time for questions and answers. So Victoria, I don't know if any questions have been popping in. I would invite anybody to ask questions through the chat pod, because we've got a few more minutes left.
Absolutely. Thanks, Scott. Really valuable stuff. And of course, thank you for finally answering the chicken or the egg first question. Now we're all at least coming away with that. So we've got some questions coming in. Feel free to enter those into either the questions box or the chat box on the GoToMeeting plugin. We'll start with a couple we've been getting in. This first one's one we get often. I'm going to combine a couple here. So, Scott, you're talking about surveys need to be unique to support your strategy, but leaders often ask, how do my results compare to benchmarks? How do they compare to my competitors? How do you answer that question?
Sure. Leaders do often ask about norms and give me some benchmarks. I'm not going to undermine or dismiss the importance of knowing how you might compare to somebody else, but kind of like the chicken and egg thing, I would say that you want to ask the most important questions and not be distracted by trying to get a lot of benchmarks. For example, in that tech company case study that I provided, some of the most impactful questions that were in the rest of the survey dealt with questions about their sales process and their solution selling approach. And we asked that of people who were involved in the sales process, which could be engineers, it could be service people, it could be salespeople, right? And that was by far and away more connected to a unique strategy that they were pursuing than generic questions ever could be. So you want to make sure, you can have some generic questions, it's fine. There's some sort of broad employee relations kinds of topics where you can have a bit of a generic quality, and that's okay. Do you like where your career's going, or what's your relationship with your boss? Does your boss help you out, when you encounter barriers? I mean, all those kinds of things are fairly generic, but when we look at not just the employee relations experience, but the organizational effectiveness kind of direction that a survey can go, there may be norms, there may be some sort of comparisons you can make, but you don't want to be distracted by that, and you don't want to feel like external industry are the only way to get a sense of what's a good score or a bad score. Like in that example I gave, we contrasted all salespeople to President's Club or the top salespeople. That was a way to calibrate what those numbers meant. And really what any kind of comparison, norms, benchmarks included, it's helping you guide and energize action. And that's only one way to do it. You want to guide and energize the right action in the right ways, however you might manage it. So norms can be important, but that's not how I would start a survey design conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We got to follow on to that. So if we're developing a survey based on strategy and it's headed in the direction of organizational effectiveness, is this the same as an engagement survey? Do you call it an engagement survey, or is that something that's outdated?
Increasingly people are not calling things engagement surveys, at least amongst our clients. In the end, the label, I think, is not as important. A lot of times we encourage organizations to come up with their own labels that are related to what a survey wants to be, and so it can be branded and get sort of an attention. Voice of the employee is kind of a generic kind of label. There's others that I could share, but they're more interesting and more sort of organizationally centric. You want to make sure that whatever you call the survey, it's consistent with the messages of what executives want and how they might call it, especially the head of HR. But engagement is still one of the most common topics in surveys. Not the only topic. I think it's diminishing as a singular sort of spinal cord to what a survey message is all about. And other things are becoming much more relevant. But you can still call it engagement survey. I'm always a little sad, maybe, if it's just like, well, let's just call it engagement survey, because engagement implies something that is it's like a knee-jerk reaction kind of a topic, and I think we can all do better than that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Especially to get those leaders involved. Speaking of them, we've got some action-oriented questions here. In some of these example questions here, leaders are really busy and they care about their employees, but it's hard to keep them interested and committed to the survey. What's the best way to keep the attention of busy and easily distracted leaders?
Yeah. Let me sort of say two things. One is, and one of the things we've been emphasizing here is start with what they already care about, and then work the survey in as supporting to that. That's kind of easy to say, and we've given some tips, but it's hard to do. But let's also say that people are, I'm also starting with the assumption that people tend to be interested and have good intentions to do this. And let's also assume that you have sort of streamlined their assignment so that it's in front of them, it's accepted, it's fairly focused, it's not biting off too much. There's another webinar that we do about nudges, and this is where things can get really fun. Nudge is an idea based on behavioral economics and psychology, and there's a book by Richard Thaler and Sunstein that's actually called Nudge, and it's all about the little things you can do that help people live up to their own good intentions. And the sort of classic opener in the book is, if I put the carrot sticks at eye level in an elementary school cafeteria, more kids will eat it than if I put the candy at eye level. And it's like, how do we arrange the environment or the context to help people live up to their own good intentions. And there's a lot we can do with surveys to keep people reminded, and there's things like commitment devices, or working with instead of against biases and heuristics, or working towards making things much more convenient, or making sure that the social norms that are proactive are most communicated and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff we could do, and there's another webinar which we can if people have questions about it, I can follow up with them after. But it's a big topic. It's a fun topic, but I think I've hit some of the highlights here.
Yep. So we've got to keep the survey at eye level for those executives.
Yeah. There you go.
All righty. Last question here. What's the biggest derailleur of following up on action plans?
The biggest derailleur? I think it's falling out of attention. And that can happen in a couple of ways. I mean, HR can be like the personal trainer. I haven't seen you in the gym in a while. What's going to happen? If HR doesn't do their job and keep reminding people, or if executives don't have the right kind of accountability sort of set up, or if they don't care, then the whole thing will kind of fall apart. So, we spent a lot of time here talking about what do we do to match the survey to what executives already care about. I think that's sort of a part of the larger theme of, is this going to be a leadership tool or not? Or is this going to be an HR exercise? And how do you design things to be related to what people care about? And so that's it. It's like, make them care, and then design the context to sort of keep it on their radar and keep them reminded of their own commitments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. Well, that concludes the questions we've got. We have a couple of housekeeping slides about next webinars and special events. So as you all heard in the beginning, Scott and our CEO, Jeff, have a really interesting book coming out early June called Creating the Vital Organization, all about how to balance the short-term profits with long-term success. There are 2 book launch parties coming up. So if you are in New York on the 15th or San Francisco on the 21st, we would love to see you at either of those parties. Feel free to reach out to us. And we'll make sure you have the details. Everybody there's going to get a free book, hear all about the content. Also related is a special webinar series on those topics about vitality. So first one will be August 9th on protecting innovation. September 13th, we've got the 3 types of people every organization needs, and then all about the power of storytelling on November 15th. So we'll make sure you all get invites to those, and you can also sign up on our website. And then we've got a slide here about all the different things that we do at Org Vitality. So we use the data we gathered about your strategy to generate useful insight and drive action, centering around surveys and 360s and things like that, but also other applications of using data to create action from leaders. Scott, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Well, just that, this is what we do. Hopefully you've found value this webinar, and if you are interested in having further conversations, or if there's any way you think we could help, definitely reach out. We love to hear from you. We like talking about this kind of stuff, just generally. But hope you all have found at least a couple of things out of this webinar that you can take back on your jobs with you. Thank you all for coming. All right, this concludes it for everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.